She had never imagined receiving an invitation to perform at a place so grand. The envelope had been plain, almost unremarkable, but the handwriting on it was elegant, flowing with confidence, and it carried a weight that made her heart beat faster. She held it in her hands for a long time, unsure if it was real or a trick. After all, she was used to performing in small cafes and local events, where the audience nodded politely and sometimes clapped just to be kind. But this was different. This was a high-end charity gala, filled with people whose lives revolved around wealth, influence, and appearances. She wondered why they would want to hear her music. The day she was supposed to go, she woke early, her nerves tangled with excitement. She spent hours practicing in front of the mirror, adjusting her posture and making sure her fingers would move smoothly on the instrument. Every note she played carried her heart, but she worried if it would reach an audience so far removed from her world. The gala was in a part of the city she rarely visited, where the streets were lined with luxury cars and polished sidewalks. She felt like an outsider just walking among them. The buildings looked like they belonged in a magazine, all glass and marble, reflecting the sunlight in blinding ways. She had always dreamed of performing in front of an audience, but never like this. As she approached the venue, a valet opened the car door for her, bowing politely. She took a deep breath, adjusting her simple outfit, feeling slightly out of place among the evening gowns and tailored suits that shimmered around her. The grand hall awaited inside, a space so large it made her feel small, with chandeliers that hung like frozen waterfalls of light. The floors were polished until they reflected every movement, every step she took echoing softly, reminding her of the silence that often preceded judgment. She tried to steady herself, reminding her that she had been invited for her music, not her clothes, not her background, not her place in the world. Inside, the room was buzzing with quiet conversations. People sipped champagne and exchanged polite smiles, their voices soft and refined. She could hear snippets of talk about art collections, business deals, and exotic vacations. They moved in their circles with ease, a choreography of social grace she had never learned. And then there was her, standing with her instrument, feeling like a character from a story, unsure if she would be the hero or the forgotten background. She noticed the subtle looks, the polite smiles that didn't quite reach the eyes. They were kind on the surface, but their curiosity carried a hint of condescension. She had expected some skepticism, but the realization that they didn't know her work, and didn't expect much, made her palms sweat. She found her place near the stage, setting up with careful hands. The music case felt heavier than usual, carrying not just her instrument but the weight of expectation and doubt. She glanced at the audience, seeing the elegance and refinement in their posture, the confidence in their mannerisms. It was intimidating, but it was also inspiring. She realized that this was her chance to show who she really was, to let her music speak louder than any words, louder than any background or wealth or expectation. She closed her eyes for a moment, imagining the melodies she had practiced filling the hall, reaching every corner, touching hearts she didn't yet know. The air shifted slightly as she prepared to begin. The polite smiles and quiet chatter slowed, replaced by a subtle anticipation. She had faced audiences before, but this was different. This was a room of people accustomed to control, accustomed to being entertained on their terms. Her music could either meet their expectations or defy them entirely. She took another deep breath, letting her nerves settle into focus. Each note she was about to play was a declaration, a small rebellion against the assumption that she did not belong here. Her fingers touched the instrument, and she felt the familiar thrill that always came before a performance. The first notes were soft, tentative, almost shy, as if she were testing the waters. She watched the crowd carefully, seeing their polite nods and reserved expressions. Some whispered quietly to each other, glancing her way with curiosity tinged with doubt. She played on, letting the music grow, letting the emotion she had poured into every practice session guide her. The melodies rose and fell, carrying stories of hope, struggle, and joy, each note a piece of her heart. The room seemed to listen, even those who had arrived expecting a simple performance. She noticed a shift, subtle at first. The whispers died down, replaced by an attentive silence. Eyes that had barely glanced at her before were now fixed, following every movement, every expression, every sound. She felt a strange connection forming, a bridge being built between her world and theirs, made entirely of music. The grandeur of the hall, the wealth and polish of the audience, none of it mattered anymore. Only the music existed, and in it she was free. The performance continued, each piece she played revealing more of her skill and passion. She had worried that her simple, heartfelt style might not suit such a refined crowd, but now she saw that authenticity resonated more deeply than polish. She could feel the energy shift, a subtle acknowledgement that her music was not just entertainment. It was truth, emotion made audible. The hall seemed to breathe with her, the polite distance dissolving into shared experience. She realized that her fear of not belonging was unnecessary. The music itself had created her place. As the first part of her performance drew to a close, she felt a sense of accomplishment mixed with anticipation. The crowd, once skeptical and distant, was now attentive and quietly responsive. She knew there was more to come, more opportunities to captivate, to connect, to prove that talent and heart mattered more than wealth or background. The music had begun its work, and she could sense that even the most polite, guarded members of the audience were listening in a way they hadn't expected. She had arrived as an underdog, unsure of her place, and now, with every note, she was slowly claiming it. She took a moment, letting her fingers rest, feeling the vibrations of the last notes linger in the air. The hall was quiet, filled with anticipation, and in that silence, she understood the power of what she had started. The rich crowd had smiled politely at first, unsure of what to expect, but already, something had begun to change. Something in the music had spoken to them, something beyond social etiquette or expectation. She smiled faintly to herself, a mixture of relief and pride. The night was only beginning, and she was ready to continue, ready to let her music do what words could not. This was the moment she had been waiting for, the moment that would define her, not just as a performer, but as someone who could touch hearts, regardless of the walls built by wealth or status. And as she prepared for the next piece, she felt a quiet confidence growing inside her, a certainty that she belonged exactly where she was, and that her music would speak louder than any doubt. She walked through the grand hall, her instrument case held carefully in one hand, her heart still racing from the anticipation of performing. The room seemed to pulse with its own life, every corner alive with muted conversation, soft laughter, and the clinking of glasses. It was like stepping into a world painted entirely in luxury, a place she had only seen in magazines and movies. She noticed the way the chandeliers reflected light onto the marble floors, creating tiny constellations at her feet. Each step she took echoed slightly, reminding her of the quiet attention the space demanded. She tried to steady herself, reminding herself that she had been invited because of her music, not her appearance or background. As she made her way to the stage, she observed the crowd more closely. They were dressed in elegant clothes, their jewelry glinting subtly in the light. They moved with ease, exchanging polite smiles and careful nods, their conversations seemingly effortless. She felt the difference immediately, the invisible wall that separated her world from theirs. She had spent her life in small venues, where applause was warm and familiar, but here everything seemed calculated and precise. Still, she held her head high, determined to let her music speak before their eyes could judge. The closer she got to the stage, the more she felt the weight of expectation pressing on her shoulders. She had rehearsed countless times, imagined every note and every emotion, but nothing could have fully prepared her for this. She wondered if they would listen, or if they would glance at their phones, sip their drinks, and shrug her performance off as unworthy. Her fingers tightened around her instrument, and she took a deep breath, centering herself. She reminded herself that she had faced tough audiences before, and she had always found a way to reach them. There was no reason this crowd would be any different. She noticed a few faces watching her as she walked past, their polite smiles betraying a hint of curiosity. Some whispered quietly to each other, glancing her way with raised eyebrows, as if to ask, "Who is this girl, and why is she here?" She held her ground, letting their subtle scrutiny fuel her focus rather than intimidate her. The whispers did not shake her. They sharpened her awareness and reminded her why she had chosen this path. Music was her voice, her shield, and her connection to the world, and she would let it speak without fear. When she reached the stage, she paused for a moment, letting her eyes scan the audience once more. The hall was immense, and the crowd was large, but she didn't let the size overwhelm her. She could see the elegance in every gesture, the careful control in every smile. Yet behind the refinement, she sensed curiosity, a quiet questioning that begged for authenticity. That curiosity became her ally, pushing her to play not for applause, but for truth. She lifted her instrument, feeling the familiar weight and reassurance in her hands. This was hers, and she was ready. As she began to play, the first notes filled the hall, delicate and deliberate. The music was soft at first, testing the space and the audience, but it carried the sincerity of every hour she had spent practicing. Some of the wealthy attendees leaned back slightly, their expressions a mixture of politeness and indifference. A few exchanged whispers, unsure what to make of her style. She let the music grow naturally, allowing her emotions to pour through each note, each movement. Her fingers danced with confidence, telling a story that had nothing to do with wealth, status, or appearances, but everything to do with human experience. Gradually, the subtle shift began. The whispers slowed, and eyes that had been wandering now focused intently on her. She could see the faint arch of brows, the softening of expressions, the momentary pause in conversations as people allowed themselves to truly listen. The music swelled, and she poured every bit of herself into the performance, letting the melodies rise and fall, carrying stories of hope, struggle, and quiet triumph. The grand hall, once filled with polite detachment, began to feel alive with shared emotion. She realized that her authenticity had pierced through the carefully constructed barriers around them. She played on, and the crowd's reaction became increasingly evident. A few leaned forward, their elbows resting lightly on the tables, as if drawn by a force beyond their understanding. Others closed their eyes, letting the music wash over them, erasing the formalities and distinctions that had defined the evening until now. She felt a powerful connection forming, a bridge created entirely by sound and feeling. This was her moment, her ability to transform the room through her talent and sincerity. She didn't need to shout or demand attention, the music did it for her. The melodies shifted subtly, flowing from gentle and reflective to bright and confident. She could sense the energy in the room responding, a quiet awe taking hold of even the most reserved guests. The polished, wealthy crowd who had smiled politely and whispered skeptically was now silent, listening intently. The effect was intoxicating, not because of the attention, but because she had realized the power of her craft. She had the ability to touch people, regardless of their background, to make them pause, reflect, and feel. It was a reminder that music was universal, and that passion and authenticity transcended social boundaries. As the performance continued, she became more aware of herself in the moment. Each movement was intentional, each note deliberate. She noticed a few individuals at the back nodding subtly, their initial skepticism replaced by genuine appreciation. The polite smiles were now sincere, their eyes reflecting understanding rather than judgment. She felt a warmth spreading through her chest, a quiet validation of all her hard work and dedication. This was more than performing. It was sharing a part of herself, her story, and her heart with people who had assumed they would not care. She allowed herself a small smile, feeling the growing confidence in her playing. She had worried that her style might seem too simple, too raw for such an audience, but the response told her otherwise. The elegance of the hall and the refinement of the attendees did not diminish her music. Instead, it amplified it, providing a contrast that highlighted the depth of her expression. She realized that her fear of not belonging had been unnecessary. The music created a space where she was welcome, a place where emotion mattered more than wealth, and sincerity mattered more than social standing. Time seemed to stretch as she continued, her mind focused entirely on the music and the subtle reactions around her. She noticed small gestures, a hand resting on a table as someone listened intently, the tilt of a head in concentration, a faint sigh as a melody lingered in the air. Every detail reinforced her belief that music could bridge worlds, connect people across divides, and speak truths that words often could not. She felt a sense of responsibility and privilege simultaneously, aware that she had been given the chance to share her gift in a place that initially seemed out of reach. As she prepared for the final notes of this segment, she allowed herself to reflect on the journey that had brought her here. She thought of the countless hours of practice in small rooms, the moments of doubt, the encouragement from friends who believed in her, and the perseverance that had kept her going. Every step, every sacrifice, every failure had led to this moment, and she felt a quiet pride in her journey. The wealthy crowd, who had smiled politely and perhaps underestimated her, was now fully engaged, ready to witness the rest of her performance with open hearts. When the final notes lingered in the air, she felt the room holding its breath, a silence that was not awkward but filled with anticipation and respect. She allowed the sound to fade naturally, letting the impact of her music settle into the minds and hearts of the audience. Slowly, very slowly, she sensed the first signs of recognition, the subtle nods, the shifting in chairs, the collective intake of breath. It was not yet applause, but it was more important. Acknowledgement. They had listened, truly listened, and they had felt. She stepped back slightly, her fingers relaxing on her instrument, feeling the warmth of the moment. The grand hall, filled with wealth and refinement, had become a space of shared humanity. She understood then that her role was not just to perform, but to connect, to remind people that music was a bridge, a universal language that could speak to anyone regardless of status or background. And as she looked out over the audience, she felt a quiet determination and excitement for what was to come. This was just the beginning, and she knew that the rest of the evening held the potential for even deeper connection and resonance. She was ready to continue, to let her music flow freely, and to allow the audience to see and feel the heart behind every note. As she began the next piece, her confidence grew with every note. The music flowed from her effortlessly, as though it had always been a part of the room, waiting for her to release it. Her fingers moved with precision, each chord and melody carrying a story she had lived, felt, and understood. She didn't play for applause or approval. She played because it was her truth, and in that truth, she found freedom. The audience, initially polite and reserved, could no longer look away. Their eyes were fixed on her, their attention fully captured by the sound that filled the hall. The first few moments were quiet, almost hesitant, but she allowed them to breathe and grow. She remembered every small venue where she had performed, where every listener mattered, where every expression and reaction gave her strength. That experience shaped her performance here, giving it an intimacy that no grandeur could overshadow. Each note she played was deliberate, a conversation between her and the listeners, a silent sharing of emotion that transcended words. She could feel the room leaning in, the polite smiles fading into genuine interest, the skepticism dissolving into admiration. She noticed the subtle changes in the crowd. A few heads tilted slightly, eyes closed, as if trying to memorize the sound. A hand rested lightly on a table, tapping a quiet rhythm in time with the music. Some of the wealthiest and most influential people in the room were now holding their breath, letting themselves be carried by the melodies. The music created a connection that no social status could break. She felt a thrill in knowing that what she had to offer was being understood in its purest form. Her fingers moved faster now, playing intricate sequences that demanded focus and skill. She remembered the countless hours of practice, the sore fingers, the repeated mistakes, and the endless patience. Every challenge had led her to this moment, and the room responded as if it recognized the effort behind the sound. She saw subtle nods and smiles forming, the polite distance replaced by engagement. People who had once whispered doubt now whispered admiration, though softly, as if careful not to disturb the spell she had cast. The music shifted again, softer this time, almost a whisper, carrying vulnerability and emotion that made the audience lean closer in thought. She played not only with her hands but with her entire being, letting every feeling, every memory, every bit of her heart flow through the instrument. The wealthy crowd, used to entertainment as a status symbol, now experienced it as an intimate revelation. Some faces that had shown skepticism now glowed with appreciation, eyes glistening as they felt the depth of her performance. She had never seen such transformation so quickly, and it gave her strength to play on, fearless and alive. There was a moment when a single note hung in the air, long and deliberate, and for an instant, the room was completely still. No one breathed, no one whispered, no one shifted. The note seemed to hold all the weight of her journey, all the challenges, all the passion, and all the hope. She let it linger, and in that lingering, she sensed a collective understanding, a recognition that this music was more than sound. It was her story, and for the first time, the audience was not merely listening. They were feeling it, living it with her. The silence was not emptiness. It was presence, and in that presence, the connection deepened. As the tempo increased, so did the energy in the room. She played with confidence now, her movements natural and unrestrained. The music soared, filling every corner, echoing off the walls, and wrapping around the audience. She saw people leaning forward, holding their breath, their eyes wide with surprise and admiration. The polite crowd that had once seemed untouchable was now captivated, fully immersed in her performance. It was a rare and beautiful transformation, one that only authentic art could create. She felt both humbled and exhilarated by the power of music to bridge worlds. She shifted seamlessly into a new section, lighter and more playful, letting the melodies dance across the room. The audience responded in subtle ways. A toe tapping, a quiet hum, a gentle sway in rhythm. The room had begun to move with her music, even if only in spirit, and that movement brought a sense of unity. She realized that her performance was no longer about proving herself but about creating a shared experience. It didn't matter who was rich or poor, polite or judgmental. At that moment, everyone was equal, bound together by the music. The middle of her performance brought an emotional depth that surprised even her. She allowed herself to express sadness, longing, and joy simultaneously, blending the emotions seamlessly. The audience felt it all, visibly moved, some leaning back in quiet reflection, some closing their eyes to immerse themselves fully. She could sense the subtle shift in energy, the soft changes in posture, the attentive gazes that followed every note. The music had created a bridge, and she walked across it confidently, inviting the crowd to follow, to feel, to understand. She played with nuance now, bringing in small pauses and variations, letting the audience absorb each note before continuing. It was a dialogue, a silent conversation that went beyond words, beyond social status, beyond expectations. She could see the effect in their expressions, the way they unconsciously leaned in, the way their eyes softened, the way they let go of preconceptions. Each chord she played was a step in that conversation, a way to show her heart, to invite theirs, and to make the grand hall feel less like a stage and more like a shared space of emotion and understanding. The crescendos built gradually, and she felt a rush of exhilaration. Her music had taken on a life of its own, carrying the story of her journey, her struggles, her dreams, and her triumphs. The audience, once polite and distant, was now completely engaged, some holding back tears, some leaning forward in admiration, all experiencing the music as a personal connection rather than a spectacle. She played with a sense of liberation, knowing that she had touched them in a way that words never could. It was a reminder of why she loved music, why she had dedicated her life to it, and why every moment of doubt or fear had been worth enduring. As the performance neared its conclusion, she slowed the tempo, allowing the final melodies to linger in the hall. She could see the audience leaning in, holding their breath, and giving themselves over completely to the experience. Her fingers moved with care, each note a farewell and a promise, a gentle reminder that music was alive, and so was the connection it created. The wealthy, polished crowd that had smiled politely at first was now completely captivated, their earlier skepticism forgotten, replaced by genuine respect and admiration. The final notes hung in the air, echoing softly, and for a moment, the hall was silent. The silence was profound, a shared breath of awe and appreciation. She allowed herself to feel the weight of what had just occurred, the realization that her music had truly reached them, that it had touched hearts beyond expectation. The audience, once formal and restrained, slowly began to show their reaction. Quiet murmurs of admiration, the shifting of chairs, and the unmistakable glint of respect in their eyes. She had done more than perform. She had connected, inspired, and reminded them of the power of authenticity. When she finally set her instrument down, she felt a wave of relief and pride. The music had been her voice, her shield, and her bridge, and she had used it to reach an audience that had seemed untouchable at first. She looked out over the crowd, noting the subtle transformations, the polite smiles that had become genuine, the skeptical eyes that now shone with appreciation, and the quiet reverence that filled the room. She realized that her talent, her dedication, and her willingness to be vulnerable had created a moment that would not be forgotten. The rich crowd, who had smiled politely at the beginning, was no longer the same. They had listened, felt, and been moved, and that was a triumph far greater than any applause could measure. She stepped back from the stage, her heart still racing with the excitement of the performance. The audience remained silent for a moment longer, as if savoring the last echoes of her music. She knew that what she had started was only part of the journey, that there were more pieces to play, more stories to tell, and more hearts to touch. But in this moment, she allowed herself to breathe, to feel the connection, and to appreciate the power of her craft. Her music had begun to break down walls, to bridge gaps, and to speak a language that transcended wealth and status. And as she prepared for what came next, she felt a quiet certainty. This was her place, her moment, and her music would not just entertain, it would inspire. As the final chords of her last piece echoed softly through the hall, the rich crowd that had once smiled politely was now completely silent. The shift had been subtle but undeniable. The elegance and refinement that had defined their presence had been replaced by quiet attention and awe. Some held their breath, savoring the lingering notes, while others leaned slightly forward, as if trying to capture every vibration of sound that still hung in the air. She could feel the weight of the moment, a quiet acknowledgement that her music had not only been heard but felt. She allowed herself a small, humble smile, understanding that the walls of formality and distance had begun to crumble. The room seemed to vibrate with emotion, an invisible energy connecting every listener. She noticed faces that had been skeptical now softened, eyes glistening with a mixture of surprise and admiration. The polite, almost dismissive air had vanished, replaced by genuine appreciation. She had played not to impress, not to prove herself, but to share her heart, and in doing so, she had reached them in ways that words could never achieve. The music had acted as a bridge, and she could sense the transformation taking place around her. It was a rare and beautiful moment, one that validated every hour of practice, every moment of doubt, and every small performance that had prepared her for this night. Slowly, people began to respond. The applause started softly, tentative at first, as if testing the reality of what they had experienced. Then it grew, richer and more confident, spreading throughout the hall like a gentle wave. She felt a surge of gratitude, not for the recognition itself, but for the fact that her music had moved them to such an extent. It was no longer about the wealth or status of the audience. It was about shared humanity, the connection that music created across barriers that had seemed unbreakable. She had reminded them, even if only briefly, that true art touches the heart, regardless of who the listener is. Several people stood, their applause steady and heartfelt. Others clapped softly, more reflective, as if processing what they had just felt. She observed the nuances in their reactions, the way some covered their mouths in astonishment, the way others leaned back, eyes closed, letting the sound of her performance linger in their minds. It was a recognition not only of her skill but also of her courage and authenticity. In that moment, she realized that music was not simply entertainment. It was a vessel for emotion, a language that transcended all other distinctions. The wealthy crowd had come expecting refinement and perhaps a predictable performance, but instead, they received truth, heart, and soul. A few approached her after the performance, their polite smiles replaced by genuine admiration. Some spoke quietly, praising her technique, the emotion in her playing, and the way she had commanded the room without needing to assert herself. Others lingered at a distance, their expressions thoughtful, processing what they had experienced. She listened carefully, grateful for their words, but she also understood that the true impact of her music was not measured by conversation or compliments. It was measured by the moments of reflection she saw in their eyes, the subtle shifts in posture, and the collective acknowledgement that something significant had occurred. The hall, once filled with murmurs and polite chatter, had transformed into a space of quiet contemplation. The guests, now fully engaged, seemed to carry the echoes of her music with them, each note lingering in the air like a gentle reminder of what they had felt. She realized that the rich crowd, often accustomed to being entertained on their own terms, had been humbled by authenticity. Her music had reminded them that art is not about status or display. It is about connection, emotion, and honesty. She felt a profound satisfaction in knowing that her performance had created a shared experience that transcended social divisions. She took a moment to reflect on her journey. She had arrived at this gala nervous and uncertain, aware of her modest background and the disparity between herself and the audience. She had wondered if her music would resonate, if her style would be appreciated, and if she would belong in such an opulent space. But as she looked at the attentive faces, she realized that her authenticity had broken through the layers of formality and expectation. Her music had given her a voice in a world where appearances often overshadow substance, and in doing so, she had earned not just attention, but respect. The applause continued, now more assured and enthusiastic. She felt a wave of warmth wash over her, not from ego, but from the recognition that she had accomplished something meaningful. The audience had opened their hearts, allowing themselves to feel something real, something beyond social etiquette and polite gestures. She had reminded them, without words, that the simplest, most sincere expression could have a profound impact. The polite crowd had been transformed, their polite smiles now genuine, their skepticism replaced by admiration, their attention fully engaged. A few individuals lingered, moving closer to her, their expressions filled with curiosity and respect. They asked about her journey, her inspirations, and her approach to music. She answered quietly, humbly, sharing pieces of her story without exaggeration or pretense. Her answers were met with nods and thoughtful expressions, as if her words were reinforcing the impact of her performance. She felt a quiet joy in knowing that her music had opened doors not only to appreciation but also to meaningful dialogue. The audience had not only been entertained but also engaged intellectually and emotionally. As the evening continued, she noticed the subtle ways her performance had changed the atmosphere. Conversations that had been superficial and polite were now more genuine and reflective. People discussed the emotions her music had evoked, the stories they imagined, and the skill with which she had conveyed them. She realized that her music had not only captured attention but also shifted perspectives, creating a ripple effect that went beyond the confines of the hall. The wealthy guests, accustomed to controlled environments and predictable experiences, had been touched by something authentic, something unexpected, and that realization filled her with quiet pride. The rest of the evening unfolded with a sense of calm and connection. People approached her politely, some asking for an encore, others simply wishing to express their gratitude. She responded with warmth, understanding that her presence and performance had left a lasting impression. The experience reinforced her belief in the power of music to transcend social barriers, to create empathy, and to foster genuine human connection. She felt honored to have been given this opportunity, and she resolved to continue sharing her music with the same honesty and passion, regardless of the audience or setting. As the gala began to wind down, she took one last look around the hall. The chandeliers still glowed, the polished floors reflected the light softly, and the audience had begun to disperse, carrying the memory of her performance with them. She realized that the impact of her music would linger long after the notes had faded, leaving an imprint on those who had listened, reminding them of the power of sincerity and heart. The rich crowd, who had smiled politely at first, had been transformed not just by her talent, but by her courage to be herself and share her truth. In that moment, she felt a deep sense of fulfillment. Her journey had brought her here, from small venues and quiet practice rooms to a grand hall filled with people who had doubted her. She had faced her fears, trusted her abilities, and allowed her music to speak. And in return, she had received something far greater than applause. Recognition, respect, and a reminder of the profound connection that art can create. She packed up her instrument slowly, savoring the final moments of the evening, knowing that she had left a lasting impression on everyone who had been present. The music had done more than entertain. It had touched hearts, changed perspectives, and proved that authenticity and passion are the most powerful forces in any room. After the applause had finally settled, she remained on the stage for a moment, taking in the quiet energy that filled the hall. The audience, once skeptical and distant, had been transformed. Their polite smiles had become genuine. Their polite nods had turned into thoughtful recognition, and the whispers of doubt had been replaced by whispers of admiration. She felt a quiet sense of pride, not in herself, but in the power of music to touch hearts and connect people in ways words often could not. The performance had not only entertained but had left a lasting impression on everyone present. Several guests approached her, some with handshakes, others with quiet words of praise. They spoke of the emotion they had felt, the skill in her playing, and the way her music seemed to tell a story without the need for words. She listened carefully, humbly accepting their compliments, knowing that the true reward was not in their recognition, but in the shared experience she had created. It was a moment of connection, a bridge between worlds that often remained separate. She realized that her music had transcended social boundaries, proving that authenticity and passion could resonate with anyone. As she walked through the hall, instrument in hand, she observed the lingering effects of her performance. Groups of people were talking in quieter, more reflective tones. Conversations that had previously been focused on wealth, status, and social appearances had shifted. Now they discussed the music, the feelings it evoked, and the talent behind it. She overheard remarks about how her melodies had touched something deep within them, awakening emotions they had not expected to feel. It was a subtle but powerful change, a testament to the lasting impact of genuine artistry. She noticed one guest, an older man who had been particularly reserved during the performance, standing quietly near the back. His eyes were still fixed on her, and she saw a soft smile spread across his face. Later, he would approach her to express his admiration, telling her that her music had reminded him of his own youth, of moments he had cherished long ago. She felt a deep sense of fulfillment, knowing that her music could reach across generations, evoke memories, and stir emotions. It was a reminder that music is timeless, a language understood by all who are willing to listen. The evening continued, and she found herself reflecting on the journey that had led her here. From the small rooms where she had practiced tirelessly, to the local cafes where she had performed for a handful of people, every step had prepared her for this moment. The nervousness she had felt upon receiving the invitation had transformed into confidence, not because she sought approval, but because she had trusted her abilities and stayed true to her passion. She realized that every challenge, every moment of doubt, had been necessary to reach this point, and the outcome was more rewarding than she could have imagined. As the guests began to leave, she was approached by a few who wanted to discuss opportunities for future performances. They spoke of events, collaborations, and venues where her talent could be shared with even broader audiences. She listened thoughtfully, aware that while opportunities were valuable, the essence of her music was not in recognition or fame, but in its ability to touch hearts. She politely accepted their offers, feeling a sense of hope and excitement for the possibilities that lay ahead. The night had opened doors, not just in terms of career, but in the understanding that her music could have a profound and lasting impact. Walking out of the hall after the event, she felt a cool breeze on her face, a gentle reminder that the world outside continued as usual, but something had changed within her. The experience had reinforced her belief in the power of authenticity, the importance of perseverance, and the undeniable effect of heartfelt expression. She thought about the rich crowd, who had smiled politely at first but had been deeply moved by her performance. It was a reminder that true talent and sincerity could break through preconceptions, reach across social boundaries, and create genuine human connection. She reflected on the people she had encountered that night, recognizing that their admiration was rooted not just in her skill, but in the courage she displayed by sharing her true self. Music, she realized, was more than entertainment. It was a form of communication that could convey emotion, evoke reflection, and foster understanding. She had witnessed firsthand how a single performance could alter perspectives, create empathy, and leave a lasting impression. It was a humbling and inspiring realization, one that strengthened her resolve to continue pursuing her passion. As she made her way home, she replayed the evening in her mind, reliving the moments when the audience had been captivated, when their skepticism had given way to admiration, and when the power of her music had bridged gaps she had once thought insurmountable. She felt gratitude for the opportunity, for the courage to perform, and for the ability to touch others through her art. Every note she had played had been a piece of herself, and in sharing it, she had received something invaluable in return. The recognition that music has the power to connect, heal, and inspire. The experience left her with a renewed sense of purpose. She knew that there would be more performances, more audiences, and more challenges ahead, but she also knew that her authenticity and passion would guide her. She had seen the impact of music that is played from the heart, and she understood that this connection was what truly mattered. The applause, the compliments, and the admiration were gratifying, but the real reward was the knowledge that she had touched lives, even if only for a moment, and that those moments could resonate far beyond the walls of the hall. As she prepared for sleep that night, she felt a deep sense of fulfillment and peace. The rich crowd had smiled politely at first, underestimating her and her music, but by the end of the evening, she had earned their attention, their respect, and most importantly, their emotional engagement. She had reminded herself, and them, that talent, authenticity, and passion could overcome preconceptions and social barriers. It was a lesson she would carry forward, a reminder that the heart of music lies not in applause or recognition, but in its ability to connect people on a human level. In the quiet of her room, she thought about the journey that had brought her here and the possibilities that lay ahead. The experience had reaffirmed her commitment to her art and her belief in the universality of music. She understood that the rich crowd, though powerful and influential, had been moved by something simple yet profound: sincerity. That night had shown her that when music comes from the heart, it can resonate with anyone, regardless of status or background. It was a reminder of why she had chosen this path and why she would continue, no matter the challenges. The story of that evening would stay with her forever. The polite smiles of the crowd, the initial skepticism, and the eventual admiration would all become part of her memory, a testament to the transformative power of music. She knew that she had not only performed for an audience, but had also shared a piece of herself, leaving a lasting impact that went beyond the hall, beyond the applause, and beyond the immediate recognition. Her music had become a bridge, and in building that bridge, she had discovered something essential about herself and the world around her. As she finally drifted into sleep, she carried with her the warmth of the evening, the satisfaction of a job well done, and the quiet certainty that her music could continue to inspire and touch hearts. The rich crowd had smiled politely at first, but by the end of the night, they had been silenced and moved by the power of her performance. She had fulfilled not only her own aspirations but had also reminded everyone present of the beauty of authenticity and the universal language of music. And with that thought, she rested, ready to face the next performance, the next audience, and the next opportunity to share her heart through her music.